The stranger at the gate, the early morning sun cast a golden haze over the tarmac as a crowd of high-profile executives and government officials slowly gathered outside the private airfield. It was a highly restricted zone, tucked away from public. You, surrounded by towering security fences and motion sensors. Today's flight was unlike any other on board. The aircraft sat a revolutionary prototype, the most advanced aviation technology ever built, designed to change the way the world thought about travel, energy, and the environment. Among the crowd were reporters in sleek black suits, CEOs of billion-dollar companies, politicians, engineers, and aviation experts. They spoke in hushed tones, some sipping on expensive coffee, others nervously checking their watches. This was not just a test. Flight was a historic event. The aircraft, nicknamed Eclipse One, had taken 7 years of research, innovation, and sacrifice. No one outside the inner circle knew who had designed the system powering the jet. They only knew the brains behind it remained anonymous. Hidden, a mysterious dot just outside the main security gate. A slim man in a wrinkled button-down shirt and dusty sneakers stepped out of a nondescript black car. He carried a small bag slung lazily over his shoulder and walked with a quiet calmness. No bodyguards, no assistants, no entourage. Just him. He approached the security gate, nodding gently to the heavily armed officers. "Name?" asked one of the guards, scanning him from head to toe with suspicion. The other 3 officers stepped forward, adjusting their rifles and peering into the man's bag as if expecting trouble. "Sundar," the man replied, offering a simple smile. "I'm with the engineering team." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Engineering team? Where's your badge?" "I left it in the car, but you left it?" The officer cut him off, scoffing. "Sir, this is a level 5 clearance zone. We can't just let anyone waltz in claiming to be with the team." The other guard leaned over and whispered something into his colleague's ear. The first one laughed under his breath. What kind of engineer shows up in old sneakers and no ID? "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." A few of the guests inside the terminal glanced through the glass windows, curious about the commotion. The man didn't argue. He simply stepped to the side and waited, quietly, respectfully. He pulled out his phone and began reviewing a document. Completely unfazed, moments later, a black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a tech billionaire whose company had recently partnered with the project. Cameras flashed. Assistants scrambled to carry his briefcase. He nodded at the guards and was immediately waved through. The man still standing by the gate looked up and nodded at him as well. The billionaire barely noticed. He didn't recognize the face. Just another worker, he must have thought. Inside the terminal, senior officials were being briefed about the upcoming test flight. A polished woman in a Navy suit, Dr. Elena Wu, head of Global Aeronautics Strategy, stood near a digital display showing the blueprint of Eclipse One. "This aircraft is powered by a hybrid fusion core," she explained. "Completely clean energy. Silent, efficient, capable of crossing continents in under 3 hours. Who's the lead designer?" Someone asked Dr. Wu, paused for a second. "We're not disclosing that at this moment," she said carefully. "But you'll meet him?" Today, back at the gate, Sundar stood patiently, occasionally glancing at the guards who were now laughing among themselves. One of them tossed him a look of mockery. "Bet you're just trying to sneak a peek at the aircraft, huh?" One of them said. Sundar didn't reply. He simply nodded and looked away. As more luxury cars pulled in and other guests were ushered through with a quick glance, Sundar remained outside. The tension wasn't in his body, but in the air itself. Something felt wrong. Not with him, but with the people around him. They had become so used to judging others by appearance, by clothes, by influence, that they couldn't recognize depth when it stood quietly before them. 30 minutes passed. Sundar's phone buzzed. He answered it. Double quote, "Sir, we've been looking for you. Where are you?" It was a voice from the operations team. "Security won't let me through." "What? You're not inside?" I told them who I was. They didn't believe me. "Hold on. I'm sending someone now." Inside, Doctor, Wu had just finished speaking when she got the message. Her face went pale. You stopped to at the gate? She said sharply into her earpiece. Get him in. Now. But the moment had already passed. The guards were now doing a full search of Sundar's bag. They made him remove his shoes. One of them muttered under his breath. Probably just some tech wannabe trying to get close to the plane. Just then, a young engineer burst out of the terminal, running toward them with panic on his face. What the hell are you doing? He shouted. What's your problem? The lead guard barked back. That's him. That's the guy. He's the reason any of this exists. The guards froze. This man, he's Sundar Pichai, the engineer continued breathlessly. He didn't just work on the aircraft. He designed the entire system, the fusion core, the architecture, the flight protocol. He's the one who built it all. You idiots just held back the man who made history. The silence was suffocating. The guard suddenly stood straight. Eyes wide, faces pale. Sir, one of them stammered. We didn't know. Sundar looked at them, not with anger, but with a calm sadness. He didn't ask. He said quietly as the terminal doors opened and reporters rushed to capture the sudden commotion. Sundar finally stepped inside. Not because someone allowed him to, but because he had earned his place. Inside, a small group of scientists and engineers were waiting. They stood and clapped slowly, their applause echoing through the halls. Sundar nodded once and walked straight to the main screen where Eclipse One's diagnostics were displayed, but his heart wasn't on the aircraft anymore. It was still at the gate, with the guards, with the look of shame in their eyes, and with the question that began forming deep within him, how many other voices were being silenced before they even had a chance to speak. And just as the test flight countdown began, a security guard walked into the control room, holding something in his hand. It was Sundar's notebook, worn, frayed, filled with sketches, equations, and dreams. He approached Sundar hesitantly and said softly, I think you dropped this. Sundar looked at him, then looked at the notebook, but he didn't take it. Double quotes, no, he said gently. I left it there. I wanted to see if someone would care enough to return it. The guard didn't know how to respond. He stood there, frozen. Sundar turned away, focusing on the screen. But the words he had spoken stayed in the air like smoke from a quiet fire, because sometimes humility isn't about how you enter the room. It's about how you choose to be remembered. When you leave it. And as the countdown reached 10, a loud alert went off in the terminal. A systems warning. A possible malfunction in the main stabilizer. Sundar's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. And the next 5 minutes would decide not only the fate of the aircraft, but the future of aviation itself. Asterisk, the warning no one expected. Beeping sound echoed through the control center like a slow heartbeat turning irregular. Engineers paused mid-step, conversations halted mid-sentence, and the warm buzz of excitement turned quickly into a chilling stillness. Sundar stood still, eyes locked onto the flashing red line dancing across the main diagnostic screen. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but inside, a quiet urgency began to rise. His mind, built like a vast network of algorithms and empathy, began sorting through possibilities, contingencies, and invisible variables no one else had even considered. The warning light wasn't just a glitch. It was a signal, and not just any signal. It was his signal, one that he himself had embedded into the aircraft's core systems during the early phases of its prototype design meant to detect a specific anomaly. An anomaly so rare, so hard to detect, that no other system would have caught it until it was too late. A silent failure in the oxygen recirculation unit. It wouldn't cause a crash, but it would cause something much worse. Slow hypoxia. Passengers, especially. The older executives on board would begin to feel dizzy mid-flight, maybe even faint. And if that happened at 35,000 feet with half the cabin unconscious and the other half confused, it would spell disaster for the entire demonstration. And the media wouldn't report it as a minor technical fault. They would say the project failed. The world would stop believing in it. Funding would vanish, and 7 years of progress would vanish like mist under the sun. Sundar turned to the chief systems officer beside him, a man named Raphael, who had been proudly explaining the aircraft's features just moments before. Bring up the internal environmental model, Sundar said softly. Raphael blinked. Why? The external flight systems are green. Propulsion's fine. Just bring it up. But we already bring it up, Sundar repeated. But this time, he didn't need to raise his voice. There was something in his tone, a certain stillness that silenced the room. Raphael tapped into the control panel, pulling up the internal environmental diagnostics. At first, the screen looked fine. Green lights everywhere. Standard pressure, normal levels. But then Sundar leaned forward and entered a special override code that no one else in the room had ever seen before. A hidden layer of diagnostics unfolded, and there it was. A slow, almost undetectable leak from one of the high-pressure oxygen units. Not enough to trigger traditional alarms, but enough to slowly drop the oxygen concentration in the cabin by 0.02% every minute. It would take 45 minutes. Before symptoms began, the flight was scheduled to last exactly 45 minutes. A quiet gasp spread across the room. Raphael's jaw dropped. How did you know? Sundar didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the communication terminal. Send a message to the cockpit. Reroute the aircraft to stay under 20,000 feet and reduce cruise time. Tell them it's a precautionary test deviation. Someone in the back spoke nervously. But if we shorten the flight or lower altitude, won't that affect the data? The press. They'll report that Eclipse won prioritized safety over spectacle, Sundar replied. That will make a better headline than leaders collapse midair in prototype disaster. No one argued. Raphael rushed to deliver the message. Engineers scrambled to redirect telemetry, but one person stood frozen. The security guard, the same one who had blocked Sundar earlier. He had been standing near the corner of the room, watching it all unfold, holding that worn notebook Sundar had left behind. He was shaking now because the weight of his mistake was only just sinking in. He hadn't just stopped a man at a gate. He had nearly cost him the ability to stop a catastrophe. He stepped forward hesitantly and whispered, I didn't know who you were, sir. Sundar turned to him. Not with judgment, but with clarity. And that's the problem, he said. Not just here. Everywhere. We built systems that ask what people wear, not what they carry within. The guard lowered his head, but Sundar placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Now you know. Next time, look deeper. The room turned back to the screen. The aircraft Eclipse 1 was now changing altitude. The new parameters were in place. The automated systems adjusted in real time. No one on the aircraft even knew what had just been averted. To them, everything was calm. Smooth. A few in the control room exhaled for the first time in several minutes. Someone clapped quietly in relief. But Sundar wasn't celebrating. He was staring at the long, winding data log still scrolling across the secondary screen, not because he doubted his work, but because something else was bothering him. The leak wasn't a manufacturing defect. It wasn't a design error either. In fact, it shouldn't have happened at all. Not unless someone tampered with the unit. His eyes narrowed. The unit had been tested multiple times before flight. The final inspection was signed off by a third-party contractor that was brought in last minute one that Sundar himself hadn't personally vetted. He tapped on the screen. Opening the approval logs, a name appeared. Ethan Cardwell, a contractor. From a defense tech firm that had previously competed and lost against Sundar's team for government. Green energy grant. And suddenly Sundar's expression changed. From calm to focused. Because he now understood something that no one else had even imagined. This wasn't just an accident. Someone wanted Eclipse 1 to fail. And if he didn't find out who and why, this aircraft and everything it stood for would be destroyed long before it ever took its second flight. At that moment, Dr. Elena Wu walked into the control room, having just returned from a press briefing. She looked at the team, sensing the tension. What happened? She asked. Raphael turned. To her, oxygen leak. Minor. Sundar caught it. Her eyes widened. You caught that in real time? Sundar didn't look away from the screen. It wasn't random. She stepped forward, voice lowered. You think it was intentional? He finally looked at her. I think someone's scared of what this plane represents. And I think they're already inside. Dr. Wu's face turned pale. Ethan? We need to find him. Now. She pulled out her phone and dialed the operations center. Double quotes. Yes, this is Doctor. Who? Lock down the facility. No one leaves. Find Ethan Cardwell and bring him to me immediately. The security systems across the facility began to activate. Metal gates slid down. Doors locked automatically. The media, still unaware of the internal drama, were being redirected politely to the reception lounge. Told there was a delay in the post-flight briefing, but inside the control room, Sundar watched the screen with a quiet urgency. I'll be back, he said. Where are you going? Wu asked. To look at the oxygen unit with my own eyes. Raphael stepped forward. But sir, the aircraft is still in the air. Then I'll be waiting when it lands. He grabbed his bag and notebook and walked out. But as he reached the maintenance tunnel leading to the hangar's secure zone, something strange happened. His phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown. Number. You weren't supposed to be there today. You've just made a dangerous enemy. He stared at the screen. No name. No sender ID. But the weight of the words sat like ice in his chest. He closed the message and walked into the dark tunnel above him. The aircraft descended slowly toward the runway, and somewhere in the shadows of that billion-dollar facility, someone was watching him. Waiting. And planning something much bigger than anyone could see. Asterisk the face in the shadows. Aircraft touched down like a whisper across the runway, its wheels kissing the earth as if reluctant to return. Eclipse 1 rolled smoothly into the hangar's secure docking bay, its engines quiet, elegant, and unlike anything the aviation world had ever seen. Outside, the evening sky melted into a soft amber hue, casting long shadows across the tarmac. But beneath the golden calm, the air carried a pulse, one of rising tension, suspicion, and a truth begging to be uncovered. Inside the hangar, Sundar stood alone near the service entrance, the large retractable doors slowly groaning open as the aircraft came to a stop. The crew began to descend from the platform with polite smiles, completely unaware of what had nearly happened mid-flight. The co-pilot gave a thumbs up to the ground team, unaware his oxygen level had begun dropping. During the final few minutes of cruise, he had brushed it off as fatigue. The world might have applauded this flight for its clean energy innovation. But Sundar wasn't interested in applause right now. He wanted answers. He walked toward the side panel of the aircraft toward the housing unit where the primary oxygen feed lines were stored. A young technician approached him. Sir, we just completed external checks. No visible damage or leaks? The tech reported. Sundar nodded, kneeling by the access panel. External's not the problem, he said softly. It's inside. With steady hands, he opened the unit and looked into the heart of the aircraft's life support system. Dozens of metallic tubes, sensors, and modules lined the cavity like a web. He pulled out a handheld scanner and began running it along the core unit. Beep, clear, beep, clear. And then click. His finger stopped. There it was, a small pressure regulator valve that didn't match the original blueprint. Barely the size of a button, but enough to compromise airflow if rigged. It wasn't there 3 days ago. Someone had swapped it, and it was done by someone who knew exactly how to bypass the diagnostics layer, someone who had seen Sundar's early blueprints and knew what parts wouldn't be. Flagged by routine scans, he turned slowly and looked at the technician. Who was the last person to sign off on this panel? The tech blinked. I think it was one of the external contractors, a guy named Ethan. And who cleared him? He said he was with the procurement office, had clearance. Sundar stood up. Get me the logs, now. The technician ran off flustered Dot as Sundar stared at the open panel. A shadow stretched across the floor behind him. Someone was watching from the upper walkway, standing perfectly still above the hangar floor, barely visible between the metal beams. The figure's face was hidden, but their presence was undeniable. They were wearing a contractor's badge, and they weren't supposed to be there, Daz. Sundar reached for his phone to call Doctor. Ooh, the shadow moved fast, silent, but Sundar didn't miss it. He stepped back and turned his head slightly toward the walkway. You don't have to hide, he said calmly, his voice echoing faintly in the metal chamber. You already sent the message. The figure paused, then slowly began to descend the staircase. Their footsteps careful, calculated. It was Ethan Cardwell. He wore a technician's jacket and carried a maintenance tablet in his left hand. He didn't look afraid. If anything, he looked amused. Mr. Pichai, Ethan said with a thin smile. I have to admit, I didn't expect you to come down here personally. You're supposed to be giving speeches and cutting ribbons. And yet, here I am, Sundar replied, face to face with the man who nearly sabotaged 7 years of work. Ethan chuckled softly and walked closer. Sabotage is a strong word. I call it recalibration. The world's not ready for this aircraft. Too much power in too few hands. You know what happens when one company controls too much airspace. This isn't about control, Sundar said. It's about progress. Cleaner skies, safer technology, breaking the old systems. Exactly, Ethan replied, eyes sharp. You want to break the old systems. But you forgot they're not going to let you. So you're one of them? Ethan took another step forward. No, I'm not one of them. I'm the one who got left behind. There was a bitterness in his voice now. I had the same dream once. To build something that mattered. I had blueprints, concepts, a full proposal, but your team got the funding. Your name got the attention, and mine? Filed away, forgotten. Sundar looked at him. So, instead of building something better, you decided to destroy what others built. Ethan's jaw tightened. This world doesn't reward quiet builders. It rewards names, brands, faces. You talk about humility, but you walk through corridors named after you. People bow when you speak, and here I am fixing ducks. Sundar was silent for a long moment. Then he said something Ethan didn't expect. I've walked into boardrooms where they laughed at my accent. I've been dismissed because of the color of my skin. I've been overlooked in rooms full of suits with polished shoes. Don't confuse visibility with privilege. Ethan's expression faltered. The only difference between you and me, Sundar continued, is that I chose to build while they mocked me. And when the world finally looked my way, I used the light to shine on others, not to burn bridges. The silence stretched for a moment. Ethan's eyes flickered with something, a mix of regret and anger. He looked down at the tablet in his hand. It's too late now, he said quietly. They already think the flight went perfectly. But another issue will surface next time, or the time after that. The system is too complex. It can be bent, unless the system watches back, Sundar said, lifting his phone and activating the live diagnostic tracker. This aircraft doesn't just fly, it remembers every command, every access point, including yours. Ethan's face drained of color. Sundar looked him in the eye. You just left your fingerprints all over history. Suddenly, voices echoed. Down the corridor, security officers and engineers rushed in, Doctor. Wu among them. Freeze. One of the guards shouted. Ethan didn't run. He just looked at Sundar. Defeated, and then quietly handed over his badge. Maybe next time. He whispered, You'll remember the ones you passed on the way up. Sundar replied, I never forgot. The officers cuffed Ethan and led him away. Wu walked over. Her face a mixture of shock and admiration. You were right, she said. He slipped through the cracks. The cracks were always there, Sundar said. We just stopped looking. Down. As the aircraft was secured and technicians began inspecting every inch for further signs of tampering, Sundar walked back to the control center, but his thoughts weren't on the flight anymore, They were on something deeper What if the systems we create to build, to fly, to grow also create shadows? Blind spots where good people fall through? He sat down, opened his notebook, and began to write . But this time, it wasn't a diagram or a schematic . It was a question . One he planned to ask the entire team in tomorrow's debrief . How do we build a future that doesn't just fly higher, but lifts more people with it? Outside, the media still waited for a press conference. The world still celebrated a perfect flight, but inside, the real work had just begun, and Sundar knew the next phase of Eclipse One wouldn't be about engines or altitude . It would be about people, asterisk, not just imaginative. Conference room was silent, its glass walls letting in streaks of morning light that painted the floor like fractured puzzle pieces. The test flight had been a success by all public accounts. News anchors on giant screens behind Sundar hailed it as the beginning of the clean sky revolution. Headlines buzzed with admiration. Photographs of the sleek, quiet aircraft landing against a pink horizon flooded social media. Government officials sent congratulations. Billionaires texted emoji-filled praise . But none of that mattered now, not to Sundar. He stood alone at the head of the long conference table, holding a small black marker. The whiteboard behind him was blank, waiting. Across from him sat 24 people, engineers, flight specialists, investors, executives, contractors, and janitorial staff. Yes, even the janitors. Sundar had requested they be there. Personally, it confused the executives. It humbled the engineers. And it stunned the custodians. But Sundar had his reasons. Before we moved to phase 2, Sundar began, his voice calm but full of weight. I want to ask a question. No one spoke. He turned and wrote the question on the board in simple, large letters. What makes an aircraft fly? For a moment, the room was still. Then, predictably, the answers began. Aerodynamics, said one engineer. The fusion core, said another. Thrust-to-weight ratio. Lift. Fuel efficiency. Data precision. Navigation systems. Sundar nodded quietly after each answer. Then he turned around. All of those are correct, he said. But they're also incomplete. He stepped aside and pointed to the whiteboard. An aircraft doesn't just fly because of engineering. It flies because of trust. Trust in the people who build it, in the ones who maintain it, in the ones who clear its path, in the ones who say, this is safe, even when no one's watching. He paused, and that trust was broken yesterday. The room went silent again. Even the highest-ranking executives didn't move. When we discovered sabotage in the oxygen system, we realized something much larger. That in our rush to build the future, we forgot to secure the present. We brought in external contractors without enough vetting. We let appearances speak louder than character. We looked up the chain of command, but forgot to look across. His eyes moved across the room, landing gently on the security guard who had stopped him at the gate. The man was sitting quietly in the back, shoulders slouched, face heavy with guilt. Sundar walked toward him. What's your name? He asked. The guard hesitated. Miguel, he replied softly. Miguel stopped me at the gate, Sundar said to the room. He didn't know who I was, and honestly, that's okay. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some raised eyebrows. A few exchanged surprised glances. What's not okay, Sundar continued, is that he didn't ask the right questions. And the only reason he didn't ask is because the system didn't train him to. It trained him to scan, not to listen. To verify, not to understand. He turned back to the group. We can't build an aircraft to change the world while operating a culture that reflects the worst of it. A long silence followed. The kind that reshapes people. Then Sundar walked back to the whiteboard and added something under the question. Beneath what makes an aircraft fly? He wrote, the people no one sees. And then he turned around. Eye softer now. So starting today, Eclipse One isn't just a project. It's a promise. A promise to every silent worker who feels invisible. Every technician whose name gets left reports. Every janitor who cleans our brilliance but is never thanked. every security guard who protects us without knowing us. From this day forward, this aircraft will not fly unless everyone rises with it. There was a stillness in the room. Not out of fear, but reverence. Even the executives now leaned forward, listening not to a tech CEO, but to a human being who had remembered something most leaders forget, that behind every innovation are people whose stories are never told. Who was the first to speak? What? Are you proposing, Sundar? He looked at her. A new command structure, he said. One that includes non-technical voices. A committee made up of everyone: engineers, custodians, admin staff, even kitchen workers. They'll be our conscience. If something feels wrong, they have full authority to flag it. Anonymously or directly. No chain of command required. A low murmur rolled through the room. Some nodded. Others looked unsure. It'll slow things down, one executive muttered. Yes, Sundar replied. And maybe that's the speed. We should have been working it all along. He looked again at Miguel, and he's going to help lead it. Miguel looked like he had just been struck by lightning. Me? He whispered. But I made the mistake. No, Sundar said. The system made the mistake. You just reflected it. And that makes you the best person to help us fix it. Tears quietly filled the guard's eyes. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded deeply, humbly. After the meeting, as people dispersed, several stayed behind. One of the janitors, a woman named Rosa, approached Sundar slowly. No one's ever asked us to sit in a room like that, she said. We didn't think we mattered. Sundar smiled gently. But you do. Every day. She hesitated, then pulled something from her pocket. A paper napkin with a sketch of an aircraft wing drawn in pen. My husband used to be an aeronautics teacher, she said softly. He passed away last year. Before he did, he used to talk about a wing design that reduces turbulence. She handed the napkin to Sundar. Her hands trembled. I don't know if it's useful, she said, embarrassed. Sundar looked at it. Really looked. His eyes widened. Rosa, he said, do you mind if I show this to the team? She blinked. Really? This might be the answer to the micro-vibration problem we've been trying to solve. And just like that, a janitor became a contributor, not because of her job title, but because someone finally listened that evening. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon and the aircraft glistened under warm hangar lights, Sundar stood alone beneath its wings. He placed his hand gently against the fuselage. Not in awe, but in respect, because this machine was no longer just metal and circuitry. It was now a vessel for human dignity. And tomorrow, when it took its next flight, it would carry more than just passengers. It would carry every story that helped it rise. But as he stood there, watching the lights flicker across the tarmac, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. Short. Cold. Deliberate. We're not finished. Next time, it won't be oxygen. Sundar stared at the message for a long time, then looked back at the aircraft and whispered to himself, then next time, we'll be ready. The storm behind the silence as wind howled against the windows of the research facility that night, whistling through gaps like a warning tool to translate. Rain tapped on the rooftop in a slow rhythm, not chaotic, but steady, deliberate, almost as if it too was trying to speak. Inside, most of the lights were off. The rooms were empty. The labs dim, the air heavy with something unsaid. In a small room on the east wing, light spilled from beneath a glass door. Inside, Sundar sat at a narrow desk, alone, surrounded by scattered pages of schematics, data logs, and encrypted access reports. His eyes, usually full of quiet warmth, now burned with the glow of sleepless focus. He hadn't gone home. He hadn't even taken off his shoes. Not because he couldn't, but because something was wrong. The message he'd received earlier still haunted his mind. We're not finished. Next time, it won't be oxygen. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Someone had infiltrated the project. Someone with deep access, deep resources, and a deep desire to see Eclipse One fail. Ethan Cardwell was just a pawn, angry, bitter, misled. But this was different. This came from higher up, from people who didn't need to sabotage a system to destroy it. They could simply Pull the plug. Sundar's fingers moved quickly. Across his laptop, filtering through internal files, third-party audit trails, and clearance records. Timestamps. DVICE Most of it clean, but then one strange access log caught his eye. A system call that shouldn't exist. A remote configuration change made at 2:37 a.m. 2 nights before the first flight. The edit was tiny. A line of dormant code injected into a navigation subroutine, harmless on its own, invisible during normal scans. But if triggered mid-flight, it would cause a subtle delay in response time between the pilot's control input and the aircraft's actual movement. Half a second, just half a second. But at 35,000 feet during turbulence, or a precision landing, half a second could mean everything. Sundar's hands stopped moving. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to make the aircraft fail, they wanted to make him fail. They wanted Eclipse 1 to crumble, not because it was flawed, but because people believed it was. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Then something caught his attention. A whisper of motion on the security monitor of the corner of the room. Someone was moving in the hangar at 104. He tapped into the live feed and zoomed in. A tall figure in a maintenance jumpsuit was walking along the side of Eclipse 1, toward the propulsion access panel. They had no flashlight, no tools, just a small tablet in hand. They moved like they belonged, like they knew no one would question them, but Sundar knew better. He grabbed his coat, pocketed a flash drive, and left the room. As he walked quickly down the hallway, the building creaked under the weight of the storm outside. Thunder rumbled distantly. He passed empty labs, darkened offices, the quiet hum of vending machines. The farther he went, the more the silence felt alive, pressing, watching. Finally, he reached the inner doors to the hangar. He swiped his card. Stepped in. The hangar was vast, a cathedral of innovation and ambition. The massive aircraft stood in the center, majestic and motionless. And there on the far side was the figure. Back turned. Hood raised. Still working. Sundar approached. Slowly. No sudden movements. No words yet. He stopped just 10 feet away. You forgot to wipe the logs, he said softly. The figure froze. Then slowly turned. It wasn't who he expected. It was Dr. Helen Claiborne. Head of systems. Integration. Respected. Trusted. The very person who had once helped Sundar restructure the aircraft's emergency override protocol. He blinked, stunned. Helen? He asked, voice soft, almost disbelieving. She didn't look afraid. Only tired. Only older than yesterday. You weren't supposed to see this, she said. You wrote the flight algorithms, Sundar said. You mentored half this team. I did, she replied. And then I realized something. What? They're going to bury this. He frowned. Bury what? Your plane, she said. Your dream. It threatens too much. Not because it's flawed, but because it works. She stepped closer. You think the oil lobby's going to let this fly? Think the defense contractors are going to sit quietly while your silent bird rewrites their budgets? Think the private jet industry wants a clean energy future that puts them out of business? So you would join them? No, she said bitterly. I warned them, told them to collaborate, to invest, to evolve. They didn't listen. So they funded a quiet operation. A delay, a nudge here, a fault there. Just enough to raise doubt, stall the rollout, shift the narrative, and keep the old world breathing. Sundar stared at her, heartbreaking. You helped me build this. And I still believe in it, she said, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. But belief isn't enough anymore. He stepped forward. You could have come to me. They have people everywhere, she whispered. Watching, waiting. If I refused, they would have destroyed everything. Frozen funding, discredited the project. Or worse, targeted people you care about. His mind railed. The depth of the corruption wasn't just technical, it's human, systematic, invisible until it hit your heart. So, what now? Sundar asked, You sabotaged the project from the inside and pray no one notices? No, she said, holding out the tablet. I came to fix what I did. He looked down. The screen showed a series of code reversals, line by line. She had begun undoing the sabotage, resetting the delays, purging the dormant triggers. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quietly. I just want to make sure the plane flies as it was meant to. Sundar didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. There's a new layer of protection in the system now, he said. One you don't know about. It watches not just the aircraft, but the people around it. Their behavior, their access habits, it learns patterns. He plugged the drive into the panel beside her and activated the integrity protocol. A digital signature verification process began. Line by line, it scanned the full architecture of Eclipse One, and then something beautiful happened. A green light blinked on .aircraft status. Verified. Secure. Stable. The sabotage had been neutralized. The storm outside began to quiet. But inside. Helen sank slowly to the ground, knees weak. I betrayed something good. She whispered. Sundar knelt beside her. No, he said. You remembered it before it was too late. She looked up at him, eyes filled with guilt. They'll come. After you now. Let them, Sundar said calmly. Let them try. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. Not fear, but defiance. Not revenge, but resilience. He turned to face Eclipse One, still shining under the hangar lights. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Because tomorrow, the plane wouldn't just fly, it would rise with truth written in every rivet. Asterisk, the final flight. Morning came quiet and gray, like the sky had paused to think. There was no sun at first, only the thick breath of clouds rolling slowly over the horizon, hanging low above the research facility. The storm from the night before had passed, but it left behind a strange kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that lives in a room right before something sacred begins. Inside the hangar, Eclipse One sat ready for its second flight, its final test. Today's journey would be longer across the country and back, with multiple phase checks mid-air, monitored by both public and private observers. Everyone would be watching. The media, the government, rival tech companies, climate scientists, and people from every part of the world who had come to believe this aircraft might be the first step toward something better. But not all of them were rooting for it. As Sundar walked toward the aircraft, surrounded by engineers and pilots in clean uniforms. The whispers had already begun. He overheard them behind corners, in elevators. On calls not meant for him, they said there might be a delay again. There's rumors someone's pulling funding. Some senators are getting cold feet. But he didn't flinch. He just kept walking because he knew something they didn't. They were watching him, but he was watching back. He had seen the system from the inside, seen the cracks, the sabotage, the lies. And instead of running from them, he had exposed them. And in doing so, he had woken something stronger than fear. The ones who had always been there. The ones no one looked at. The ones who cleaned the labs, patrolled the gates, brewed the coffee, sorted the files, ran the background checks, coded through the night, and did it all while being ignored. But now, they were part of the flight. Rosa, the janitor, stood beside the chief engineer at today's pre-flight briefing. Miguel, the security guard who once denied Sundar entry, now wore a badge labeled Safety Integrity Liaison. And Helen Dr. Claiborne had submitted a full signed confession, along with every trace of sabotage she had encountered. Her statement had been distributed to every executive and government partner. Not to shame, but to warn, and to ask, are you here to fly or to fear? As the clock ticked closer to launch time, Sundar stepped into the cockpit. He wasn't scheduled to fly today. He wasn't even supposed to be inside the aircraft. But he had made a decision last night. He would fly with it, not just for the engineers, the media, or the numbers. But for what the aircraft now symbolized. Not power, not prestige. But progress with humility. He strapped in beside the pilot and placed his small notebook on the console. It was worn, now edges curled. Cover faded, but it carried every lesson from the journey. Just before takeoff, a message popped up on his phone. It was from an unknown number.